And Sunday, I want you all to keep watching KAFTAN TV.
Please keep watching KAFTAN TV. It is the best TV station in the country. They're doing an amazing job. Please do not touch the dial. Keep watching. Thank you.
My name is Sheila.
A warm welcome as you join us on Joy Asonye Live here on KAFTAN Television. My name is Joy Asonye. Well, today we'll be focusing on assessing the gubernatorial and state House of Assembly polls that held last weekend. That's the 18th of March, and all that characterized that. And we'll be discussing all of this with Mr. Victor Agi, the PRO Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch. So good to have you join us.
Thank you very much, Joy, for having me.
Yes, Victor, we'll go for a short break and return to discuss more. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break. Now, some civil society organizations and observers of the just concluded governorship polls have asked the government to immediately order an independent inquiry into the conduct of the 2023 general elections by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. They are asking that the inquiry address the issue of procurement, logistic management, abuse of electoral process by INEC and security officials. Like I said earlier, I have Victor Agi right here in the studio to discuss all of this with us. Victor.
Thank you very much.
There were so much went into the build-up of these general elections. I know that the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch did so much, coming from advocacy to awareness drives and programs targeted to just get the electorate more aware as to what to expect and how to shun vote buying. I remember all of that. If you have to look back in retrospect and assess the general elections or in entirety, what would you say you should have done better in terms of reaching out to electorate?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joy, for having me. Like you rightly noted, the expectations of Nigerians was really high regarding the 2023 general elections. You know, it all started when the Electoral Act 2022 was signed into law. It was like a breakthrough, as it were, when it comes to conducting elections in Nigeria. And one of the things that the authority, and by authority I mean the INEC, you know, the electoral umpire, kept assuring us, even up to some weeks to the election, is the fact that the election was going to be better than what it used to be, especially with the electronic transmission of result, you know. Over the period, I think in November thereabout, there was a breaking news that INEC wasn't going to transmit results electronically. And the INEC chairman actually came during that period to debunk the story and to assure Nigerians that elections were going to be, transmitted electronically,
And, in real time, I remember.
Real time, yes. And that was one of the things that raised Nigerians' hope, of having a credible election. And we saw what happened, during the presidential election. And so there is a peculiar problem, in the Nigerian system, which is trust. And so while INEC successfully raised our trust level prior the election, it happened that it dashed that trust. And so the level of distrust in the system is widening, as it were, especially when it comes to the electoral process.
Right.
And so what happened during the presidential election, most people actually felt discouraged. A lot of persons were actually embarrassed by what INEC actually did during the presidential election.
Polls,
and
right.
so that was what actually transpired yesterday. I mean the 18th the March 18th governorship election that held last week, Saturday. You saw that the turnout eventually reduced.
Yes, it
because
did.
most people no longer trust in INEC's ability to deliver a credible poll. And so the turnout reduced. And so the effort, the gains that were made by civil society, by INEC itself and other stakeholders to build, trust in the system were dashed.
Right.
Yes. And
Despite, in spite of all of that, I must take you back to the presidential polls. I mean, INEC came up with a number saying that over 87 million people
Yes.
had collected their PVCs.
Yes.
But if you follow the elections, 25 million voted.
yes.
So there was already that apathy during the presidential elections. What would you say caused that? Is it one of the terms I've been listening to lately? It's technical
Well,
oppression.
There are two ways to look at it. Previously, before now, what we know of Nigerian elections is the fact that politicians sit somewhere and write numbers. For instance, in 2019,
Right.
They said about 33 out of about 84 million registered voters actually participated in the election, which was even more than what we saw in the presidential poll of 25th February. But do you know that some observers actually said that the turnout of voters in the February 25th was the best people had ever witnessed? So how do you now correlate the fact that we had larger turnout of voters and yet the figures are dropping in terms of the overall numbers? And so we actually need to interrogate something. We need to do a voter audit, a voter register audit. We really need to know whether Nigerians actually have as much as 87 million registered voters who have collected their PVC. In fact, the figure is 93 million
who registered.
Yes, who registered. It is just that about 87 had collected their PVC. And so we need to really interrogate, do we really have as many as 87 million Nigerians? Because the figure or the observers are saying that most people, many people were interested in the process. I voted for the first time. And there were a lot of
first-time voters as
well. And we saw the crowd at the polling station. Of course, there were issues of disenfranchisement, in which case INEC, of course, logistics arrived late and people couldn't vote and all of those things. They were part of the reasons why the figure actually reduced. But on a general note, we really need to do an audit to really determine whether we have as many as 87 million Nigerians who actually have PVC. That is on the one side. On the other side, we need to also interrogate the fact that most people did not vote. And we also need to interrogate the fact that there were suppressions, allegations of suppressions, by observers, in the sense that some persons were not even allowed to vote. That was visible everywhere, especially during the governorship election that we just witnessed. So we really need to look at all of these issues. But the fact remains that INEC has not lived up to expectation of many Nigerians. Of course, they are doing, some say they are doing the bidding of some persons, and so it's not out of place to see people who are coming out to say INEC has improved the process. But of course, as a civil society and as an observer, what we are seeing is not what it should be really.
Now, in my monologue, I talked about the civil society organizations that are at this moment asking for an inquiry into the conduct of the general conduct of the elections. What do you think this inquiry would prove? I mean, we already know what happened. A lot of Nigerians already know there was voter oppression, there was violence, there was harassment, there was that intimidation, so there were security breaches. What would you say that this inquiry would bring to fore that Nigerians do not already know? And what would be the step after that? Would there be punitive measures that will be meted on those who perpetrate electoral violence?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether there are going to be punitive measures. Yeah, because we have one party, handing over to, the same party, and so we would likely appoint the next INEC chairman. We're not necessarily even talking about INEC chairman, because if you look at the chain, the corruption we are seeing in the system is not perpetrated by only INEC.
Exactly.
We have stakeholders. We have the security agencies who indeed are not even under the control of INEC chairman. We have the state commissioners of police who should actually direct their men to do the right thing. And so when you have all of this, happening, and you have a government that is coming to say, thank you for helping me to, win election, as it were, you may not really expect too much punitive action. But what we should do to improve the system is this. For instance, INEC got a budget of about 305 billion to conduct this election. That is mouth-watering. If you give half of that money to a private consultant to conduct this election, we'll have a better outcome. I can guarantee you that. So, and
it probably will be more independent, as some have more
transparent and accountability. If you give half of that money, yes. And so why would INEC, for instance, collect as much as 305 billion to conduct this election aside their annual budget? This is aside their annual budget. Last time I checked, INEC annual budget was around 40 to 50 billion or thereabout. The last time I checked, but I don't know what it is for this year. Aside their budget, they collected as much as that. So the inquiry should ask, what has INEC done with 305 billion?
And still have logistical problems.
Why is it that we have
technological problems?
Why is it that we have 305 billion to conduct an election and INEC did not deem it fit to actually carry out a thorough audit of the systems, the IREV as it were, and of course the beavers that failed in some instances? Why is it that INEC could not handle all of these things before the election? Why would INEC collect as much as 305 billion, for instance, and come out and tell us that their server failed? It is not reasonable anywhere. And so
you do not believe that the data was overwhelming despite the scaling? They had said they had off-cycle elections and they did not have that much data, and they had to scale up for the presidential.
If as a leader you couldn't anticipate that the data for presidential will be bigger than what you had during the state, then you are not, I'm sorry, you are not good enough for that position. Yeah, you're not good enough for that position. So INEC collected that much money, so we should be interrogating how much was expended on this process. We should be interrogating the security personnel that played several roles in actually creating what we saw, especially during the governorship election across the state. What is the role of security in our politics? Why would a thug, for instance, snatch a ballot box and there is a police officer in the same video who is not doing anything?
There were several videos such as that where it seemed like the police officers there were not doing anything to help. But we had this conversation, and every aspect of these elections, the media, civil society organizations interrogated INEC squarely and very critically. And one of the questions a lot of people asked were, it's okay to come to the polling unit, but would one policeman or two policemen be enough in some places that was already earmarked as flashpoint? We also asked the question of, when they do come and you tell us, it's 300 meters from the polling unit, there's a security agent that does not have arms. And we already know how it could go, where people come in with superior arms and all of that. We ask those questions. Do you think we should have done more in ensuring that that aspect of it was better and more critically looked at to ensure Nigerians were safe? We saw all the violence that happened. We saw people being killed. It was a very sad process, if you ask me.
Yeah, fundamental to what has happened is the fact that the politicians have mastered, the act of, wielding power, to continue to subjugate the people. That is what has happened. And so we have a situation whereby a governor, for instance, could direct a commissioner of police, which constitutionally is not even right.
Exactly.
And to do certain things. And we saw what really, transpired during the whole process. And so for police and, of course, armed policemen manning the poll, the truth is that if you do your analysis, you will know where this red area, the red lines areas are. It is not the whole of Nigerians, that need the concentration of security during this poll.
Exactly.
It is not the whole of Nigerians. Of course, for the presidential election that I witnessed here in Abuja, you barely need, no security person, at the poll. And of course, there are several states like that who do not really need the concentration, but they are red, flash points, where you know that these things are likely going to happen. Prior, the presidential election, there were massive deployment of army, especially to states like Lagos, to states like Rivers and some of these areas that, could...
volatile.
That are volatile, But what happened during the governorship, it will seem the leadership, the presidency, as it were, actually toned down on its, position to actually ensure a free and fair process during the governorship, and anything could pass. We'll come to what that means to vote buying, maybe at the course of the conversation. Exactly. Yeah, but the point is that if you do a thorough analysis of the election, you will know where flashpoints are and deploy adequate security. And what we saw is a process where some security personnel actually aided these thugs to do what they did during the polls, and it's unacceptable. We can't really continue like this, please.
Do you think we should have done more in terms of training of the security agents, or punitive measures threatened? I remember the NSA coming to say that all security agents that will be deployed were trained, they already knew their own news, and they were not going to collude with anybody to perpetrate any sort of electoral violence. Do you think that Nigerians should have done more in terms of calling them out? There's only so much the media can do, but Nigerians who were there, who saw these breaches, security breaches, and saw what the role the security people played, do you think they should have done more in calling them out? And would it be effective?
Yeah, to start with your first question, training don't make effective system. Yeah, it is system that makes effective system, if that makes sense. It is not because they were not trained that made them to do what they did. Of course, they were trained. Of course, most of those training were actually playing to the gallery of, we are training this security personnel. You don't need training to do the right thing as human. I wouldn't need training, for instance, to take good care of my family, for instance.
Exactly.
Yes. And so police officers don't need training during elections to safeguard the lives and properties of Nigerians. And so it is not a question of whether the training was deficient, prior the elections. No, they received training, but what happened is the failure of the system. The system actually failed, and so whether there is training or no training.
What do you mean by the system? Because it is speculated that political actors used them, mobilized them, even though they were sent there to man the.
That is the failure of the system.
So when you say failure of the system, what do you mean exactly?
When we have the Nigerian police, for instance, the Nigerian police do not need, for instance, the governor to perform its role of securing lives and property, what you need to do is to go to that poll, for instance, of course, 30 meters away from your polling, but that doesn't mean you won't be monitoring what is happening at the polling center. And so if you want to do your job well, you ensure the security of that region, of the area, you know, of course, the polling area, and you ensure that there's no infiltration. But you have a situation where they turn blind eyes. So you don't need training to, you know, to correct that. So you need a working system. You need a direction, for instance, from the DPO, you know, to the state commissioner level, and of course to the
the entire chain.
The entire chain, you know, to actually tell them to do the right thing. So if we have directive from the entire chain, you know, telling them to do the right thing, we won't need anybody, no Nigerian, to tell you to do the right thing before you secure. We are paying these people with, you know, Nigerian tax. I mean, they are being paid by, you know, taxpayers' money. And so we don't need to really beg them to do the right thing. So it's a failure of the system in the sense that the system has not been adequate enough in directing their actions, especially when it comes to, you know, manning electoral process, the election process, as it were. And so that is the failure of the system. And so it is not that they don't receive training. Even if citizens, for instance, we saw in some situation where citizens, you know, that went to vote actually try to match the talks. But what were the response of the police officers? Were they with the citizens? No, they turned blind eyes. I watched a video in Lagos. Of course, we also must be wary of fake news and all of those. But this particular one, this particular one is too real to be fake. Let me use that. And so I saw this video where the police officer was walking hand in hand with a thug with a gun and shooting sporadically, and I was like, is this still a country? So that is the failure of the system. You don't
I also saw one. The one I saw was actually the live feeds from one of our correspondents, you know, Jota in Lagos State, where police, there was complaint that thugs had come and shot sporadically, scattered the place, and got electorates to run for their lives, and everything was gone. But they really wanted to vote, and so they called the police. Those ones came several minutes after, almost an hour after what happened. And after what I would think is preliminary investigation, they all packed themselves and were leaving. And these people said, no, you can't leave until the INEC personnel feel safe enough to come back, and you must protect us here. And it became another altercation altogether. But it goes to ask, are they overwhelmed? Did the electoral process show the flaws in the boots on ground when it comes to the police force?
Well, obviously, and of course, it's been a conversation about, of course, the Nigerian police to man's ratio, the ratio of police to of course,
the citizen.
To the citizen is a conversation that, of course, has been ongoing for, of course. So we don't have an adequate personnel, you know. But like I mentioned earlier, if you do a thorough analysis, you would know where they will be needed most for this election, for instance. And so if you deploy them to where they will be needed most, then we would have solved the problem of having inadequate personnel. But this actually wasn't the case. I don't think it was a case of not having sufficient personnel to actually guide the booth. It was a case of failed system. I just have to refer to that point, that the system has failed, and it has enabled some persons to behave in certain ways because they believe that anything can go. You know, if you check what happened during the presidential, for instance, a lot of irregularities happened. And up to now, if you ask any of the agencies how many people are in custody, you know, preparing for, you know, prosecution, you may hardly find any.
No, I mean, I read about I think Rivers State's House of Representative candidates. At least I know about one right now. And I know that came after a lot of backlash and people responding. But let's move to logistical management. Would you say it improved during these gubernatorial elections?
Yes.
I know it was a very huge problem during the presidential polls where INEC personnel did not get to their polling units until very late into the day.
Yes, logistics improved during the gubernatorial poll. Yeah, but again, that improvement may actually be so obvious because there was apathy. Yeah, in most places during the presidential elections where I voted, INEC personnel arrived around 11:11.
Wow.
In the morning, you know. And they were already crowded in that particular polling unit. And so because there weren't much people who were interested in this poll, especially, I mean, the governorship poll, you can't really say whether INEC improved, but maybe we should give it to them. They saw the lapses, they corrected the lapses during the presidential, and they improved, because I also saw that before 8 o'clock in some polling unit during this governorship, before 7 even, you know, in some polling unit in Lagos, they were already there waiting for voters to come. Yeah, I saw that experience somewhere, that the INEC officials were actually waiting for people to come, and so they improved. But again, if you want to really measure it side by side, the fact that people didn't come, we may not really conclude that we have gotten logistics right when it comes to elections, because the apathy was obvious. People didn't no longer trust in the system to even come and vote. People no longer trust in INEC to conduct a credible poll, you know, and so they stay back. But give it to INEC this time around, they were on time in most of the polling units.
Yes. Okay, Victor Agi, we'll go for a short break right now and return to discuss more. We're still talking about assessing the gubernatorial and State House of Assembly polls that happened just last weekend, 18th of March. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
BCFR, the Black Comedian of the Federal Republic. I tell you, when it comes to the best of entertainment, the best of news, the best of information, something that is educative, you're right here at the best place to see that. It's KAFTAN TV. You know what? Increase the volume. Keep watching. Don't touch the dial, okay?
It's your girl Nkechi Blessing Sunday. I want you all to keep watching KAFTAN TV.
Please keep watching KAFTAN TV. It is the best civil station in the country. They're doing an amazing job. Please do not touch the dial. Keep watching. Thank you.
My name is Sheilo, BCFR, the Black Comedian of the Federal Republic. I tell you, when it comes to the best of entertainment, the best of news, the best of information, something that is educative, you're right here at the best place to see that. It's KAFTAN TV. You know what? Increase the volume. Keep watching. Don't touch the dial, okay?
It's your girl Nkechi Blessing Sunday. I want you all to keep watching KAFTAN TV.
Please keep watching KAFTAN TV. It is the best civil station in the country. They're doing an amazing job. Please do not touch the dial. Keep watching. Thank you.
This is still Joy Asonye Live, where we are discussing the assessment of the just concluded governorship and State House of Assembly polls that happened last weekend. I will be discussing all of this with Victor Agi, PRO Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch. Now, we had moved the conversation to logistics, and you said there's an improvement. However, another issue that was raised was the fact that we had just one polling unit, and sometimes we saw about 2,000 electorates queuing up to vote, and that caused what I now got to learn is a technical disenfranchisement. What would you say about that? Should there have been more? And I remember INEC had reduced it, cutting off some polling units.
Yes, it was actually an issue that was observed during the poll. I'm not sure if it has legal backing, but a polling unit, excuse me, is supposed to be about 750.
750, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if that has a legal backing, but that was what I read somewhere. And so if that is the case, it means technically some persons will be disenfranchised. For instance, my polling unit at where I voted during the presidential, we were about 1,060 registered voters on that polling unit. And so even if INEC comes at 8:30 in the morning, like the timetable actually stipulates, and you go through all the process of capturing the voter, the accreditation and voting for every of the voter. Even if you have just 50% of the voters coming out, you won't be able to finish
exactly.
by 2:30.
Exactly.
By 2:30, it is not possible.
Because it takes about roughly 10 minutes to get an electorate captured.
Even if it is 5 minutes, by the time you add it up, the hours stipulated, about 6 hours or thereabout, for voting, is not sufficient to capture 750. Let's even stick to that 750. And so that is technically disenfranchising some persons. And that was why in some places, especially in Abuja, where I also observed, it's that voting, went as far as
into the night.
Into the night, because people wanted to vote. People said they can't come out and stay down long and not vote. And so they wanted to vote, and so voting went into the night. And of course, it is not everybody that has the patience to wait, till that late in the night. And so somehow some persons would actually have been disenfranchised because of that. And so other instances in Lagos, even during this governorship election, I read of someone who had his or a polling unit actually taking change. For governorship, imagine voting some 2 weeks back in a particular polling unit and going back there for the governorship, they had redeployed you to another polling unit.
Wow. So
some of these issues are there. Well, you want to call it technical disenfranchisement, yes. But again, we must also acknowledge the fact that the eventual polling unit that shifted most people to were not actually far from the original polling unit. But again, some persons may not even have the patience to start looking for the new polling unit. Some persons do not even have the technical wherewithal to actually check their new polling unit. And so what happens? You go back to your house and stay because you can't start looking for polling unit. Coupled with the fact that there's some level of distrust now in the system. You saw some of this happening during the governorship election. Yeah, technical disenfranchisement, you can call it that, but that is just what it is. INEC shifted, moved some persons polling units to other places without notification. Maybe they notify, but
it didn't reach them.
Yeah, it is also possible that I didn't see it, before going out and all of those things. So it goes to show that we must prepare better for elections. You have 4 years, for instance, to prepare for an election. And so if you have 4 years, you should have put all of these things in order, in place, But again, we must also interrogate the Nigerian culture. A culture of waiting for the last minute to get things done. It is also possible that INEC has sent messages to people telling them of their changes, or the changes in their polling unit. But an average Nigerian will wait till the day he or she wants to vote before, scouting for where the new polling unit is.
But should it still be such a cumbersome process? Shouldn't we find less process with hurdles? I mean, we have gotten to an age where, Victor, you can open an account with your phone sitting right here in any bank in Nigeria, and it will be harmonized with your BVN and other accounts sitting here. If anybody withdraws money from your account, you get an alert for it anywhere in the world. So we have gotten to this stage. Why are we not seeing it reflect this in our electoral process? A lot of people have speculated that this is intentional, where we bring hurdles that do not exist. Is that your thought as well?
You know, the simple answer from my perspective is value. What value do we have in the banking system, for instance? Why should the bank make it very easy for me to open an account, you know, remotely, I mean, on my own, without having to physically go to the bank? Value, because of what they will get, you know, because of what I will also, you know, get. Value. But in the Nigerian system, we have not actually transcended into that place of value for our system. Value for our system. And so we still have that idea that it is government, anything can go, I can't kill myself, you know, that kind of thinking. So that is one of the things that, one of the problems that we continue to have. The value for the system is not there. And that is why INEC would wait for maybe some hours to the election before sending you your new location, your voting location.
That's so unfortunate.
Value for the system, you know. But again, we can't entirely blame INEC for some of these things. We also have the Nigerian culture, like I mentioned, the Nigerian culture that doesn't really feel that, that doesn't take government seriously. Of course, it comes from somewhere. It comes from the fact that there is a distrust, like I said, in the system. And again, there is no value for the system. There's no value for, you know, sacrificing so much, you know, for the system. And so these are the issues, basically. Nigerians do not, most Nigerians do not think that they can go any length, you know, to make the system work, because they feel the system is corrupt. So it's something that we also need to change as a people.
Agi, let's go to the high prevalence and incidences of vote buying that we saw. And you did so much in dissuading Nigerians from receiving. Even though that was a very difficult one, we had arguments where Nigerians were caught between, should I get this monies and still vote my conscience, or should I just sell out my vote, I mean, and get an extra buck? But what would you say, starting from the report that was conducted from the Fiscal Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch, and your engagement with Nigerians? I know you had Twitter space interactions and all of that. First of all, before we get to how it eventually turned out, what would you say your engagement was like?
Yes. Campaign financing, electoral financing, whichever one you want to call it, is a conversation that we must continue to have. You know, if we must get our elections right. Somehow, because of the policies, you know, introduced by the CBN prior to the presidential election, money wasn't so much of a determining factor in the presidential election. And we must give it to the president at that time, you know, for introducing that policy. Excuse me. It would have been a different case altogether for the presidential election. And while we are also blaming INEC and, of course, other stakeholders for their failure, we must also mention that for the first time, we saw incumbent governors, you know, losing their
seating, yes,
you know, their senatorial bid and all of those things that happen in some, especially in some states in the south and southeast. You know, it goes to also tell you that there were some things that were improved. And so you couldn't outrightly write a figure and submit, you know, because of the beavers, you know, that captured the numbers of accredited voters and all of those things. And so that is that for that. So money wasn't too much influential in the presidential election, because there was no cash. There was no cash anywhere, and of course the glitches with the network, you know,
did not let a lot of
as many as you would want. And so how much of influence would that have? So for the presidential election, we are proud, you know, as a center, that money wasn't too much of an influence. What was our direction really? For our electoral financing project, we actually looking at the politicians. We are asking them, where is the source of your funding?
Fund.
You know, you can't just be a politician, one-off politician, for instance, and come for presidential campaigns and you are spraying money. You are spending money. Of course, elections are expensive. Yes, but elections shouldn't be won squarely by money. That is why sections 85 down to 89 of the Electoral Act, you know, stipulates spending processes for elections. Of course, there are spending caps for the presidential, which is 5 billion. But believe you me, even their primaries alone got as much, if not more than the 5 million that the electoral has stipulated for a presidential candidate to spend. And so we are asking as a center, where is the source of this your money?
Fund, right.
I mean, where are you getting all of this money from? So we are mostly coming from a moral background to say, for electors to actually trust you with their vote, they need to know where the sources of your money are coming from. So we developed a questionnaire to that effect, send it to as many, you know, candidates as possible.
How was the response? Right.
Unfortunately, there was no response.
None at all.
None responded. None responded. We didn't stop there. We keep tagging them. We went as far as, you know, sending them DMs, mails, and all of those things. But
was this targeted at just the presidential, or it cut across gubernatorial as well?
Across. We have a database we are developing at the center, which has the names of the candidate, their party, and of course their other profile. So it's not just for presidential, across. So, like I mentioned,
and you got no response.
There was no response.
Wow,
there was no response.
That's really shocking.
So we took the conversation from just the politicians to the citizens. Don't allow politicians to weaponize poverty, because if you sell your vote, you are selling your future. You know, because this politician who spends so much money, we want to recoup his monies
naturally.
You know, naturally, when he gets
get into power.
You know, so we took that conversation, of course, through Twitter Spaces. We had stakeholder engagement to do all of those campaigns. Yeah, should we say our campaign was successful with regard to telling Nigerians not to collect, you know, money for sell their vote? Well, because of what happens, we couldn't really say if it was stunningly successful. Right. I don't know if you got that stunningly successful. I remember.
Yes. I see what you're doing there.
Yes. So, but of course, the policy helped the process, and it wasn't monetized. But come to the governorship, we saw what happened. We saw what happened in Kaduna. Report from Kaduna is something you don't want to actually investigate. You know, where monies were actually used as low as 1,000 naira to buy votes. But do you blame the citizens, especially in this cash crunch economy where people are actually looking for, you know, cash to buy the next meal?
Exactly.
You know.
So while you applauded this administration for the cashless policy that was enacted before the presidential, it also had a bad side where Nigerians now would collect anything as long as it is cash. Well,
my expectation personally is that the president, well, I wouldn't say that on air, because that would mean actually asking the president to, you know, disobey the Supreme Court order. Yeah. But our expectation, actually even from the Supreme Court, was for them to hold on till the governorship elections are over, you know, before making any announcement about the cash. But, you know, what happened, and of course the president eventually considered and gave the go-ahead for the old Naira notes to be used. And it was used, and we saw what happened. There were more incidences of vote buying during the governorship in some of the states, but of course, you know, not all the states, because cash was still an issue. Cash was still an issue in some of the states, and so to some extent, the policy actually affected our appraisal of whether money is still influential, you know, in the outcome of elections, as it were. So going forward, we'll get to see if those advocacy of reaching out to Nigerians, don't sell your vote, will work. But one thing we taken away from this election is the fact that Nigerians are more aware now. Yeah, they are more aware. They are more aware politically.
Right.
They want to be part of the process, even though there is a distrust as a result of how the process panned out. But the awareness, we hope, we actually go into the 2027 elections, and people will not sell their votes. That is what we are hoping for. And the truth is, if we have good governance, then naturally the issue of vote buying and vote selling will naturally go down.
Right.
We have governors who have been re-elected not because they were able to buy votes. I will give you a case study. Governor of Oyo State, Seyi Makinde. I'm not sure he got re-elected because of
he sold or bought votes.
Bought votes, you know. It was because some persons believe, most persons actually believe that he did well, you know, during his first tenure, and so he should be rewarded with another tenure.
Are you coming to this conclusion because you monitored the electoral process there?
Well, not necessarily because I monitored electoral process there, but the public information available about the state, you know, is a public information, and so you could actually project that this is going to happen, you know, despite the wave, the APC wave, you know, in the southwest. If you actually check the elections, apart from Osun State, there was the APC wave in the southwest. Even the presidential election, the APC won in Oyo State.
Exactly.
So you would think that it will affect the government.
But then again, we saw the romance between the Oyo State governor with the APC, so maybe that also helped with that. But yeah, I would still talk about this vote buying, where we saw people, there were people captured with monies and all that. Would you say that the wave of awareness that we saw, that awareness where young people are more interested in participating in the electoral process, was also not captured well when it comes to ensuring that these vices around electioneering is reduced? We saw the harassment that when you talk about harassment and intimidation, while there were young people who were harassed, young people too were perpetrating this. When you talk of vote buying, while there are those who are garnering young people to sell those votes to, young people too had found their way to accept that they would help in the process of buying votes rather. So would you say that we didn't capture enough people and we could have done better, and that would have maybe dissuaded them from joining this horrible syndicates of marring our electoral process? Yeah,
we have fundamental issues around poverty. And so vote buying necessarily is a weaponization of poverty by the political money bags who feel that give these people money and they will do your bidding. And so that was what happened. We have poverty, a youth who is jobless, for instance, who looks forward to the political season to cash out, you know, let me use that word, cash out.
Exactly.
Yeah, would submit to some of these vices, as it were. And so there is also illiteracy, exposure, you know. Some of these persons who are ready to, if you check them, they are mostly illiterate. If you check, if you investigate, it's not, I'm not saying this as a product of empirical research, no, but if you really investigate, you discover that most of the persons who are willing to for vote buying and other political vices are illiterate with little or no exposure. Excuse me. And so for that reason, they are easily available for the money back politicians to use. And so somehow they don't think what they are doing is wrong. They have been so brainwashed to believe that what they are doing is not wrong.
In fact right.
Yes, because also another conversation which we must begin to integrate is the issue of ethnicity. It has ethnic bigotry played another major role during these elections. And so politicians capitalize on that to actually use some young persons to their advantage. Unfortunately, it is really unfortunate. As a matter of fact, for me, this election one of the outcomes, that we must really, really pay attention to is the issue of ethnic bigotry, where people wear ambers of ethnicity, you are not from this place, and we can't be having that in our elections. And so these are some of the things that actually led to...
culminated into what we saw.
What we saw, if you are not literate enough, if you don't have the awareness, the politicians will use you. If you are not, if you are poor, you don't have the next meal, the politicians will use you. And so these are fundamental issues that we must address, not for election, but for the purpose of the society, so that we'll have a society, to live. Yeah.
So after all that happened, what would you say when it comes to the campaign spending cap that was released way earlier, the 5 billion for president and so on? What would you say would happen now for those who must have overshot that limit?
Unfortunately, we are not too good on data. And so even if you want to go further on this, you don't have data to prove that someone spent more than the...
Victor, we had this conversation some time ago where I told you that sitting where I am and looking at all the private jets that are moving around and doing my calculation here, I can already tell you who has gone past the cap.
Well, you can... I want to also believe that there are some persons actually monitoring. During the primaries, we were gathering data. And what were we doing? We'll go to a particular state. Why we didn't release that data was because we couldn't get as many as possible. So we'll go to a particular state,
right.
Ask delegates how much they were paid, during the, the primary elections of most of the political parties, and they will tell us we have a...
They admitted to being paid by aspirants.
Definitely.
To vote for them.
Definitely. So we have that data, but we couldn't make it public because we couldn't gather enough, to actually buttress a point. Yeah, so we have that kind of data. Well, there were some persons who could actually... It is very easy to monitor the logistics, the flying that you were talking about.
Yes.
Because it's regulated. So you can actually get figures of how much was spent, but I don't know if the system is willing to release those information. By the system, I mean, can you approach the NACA, that is the aviation sector regulator now, for instance,
right, to
release the data, of where this presidential candidate actually went to, to cost the data for you, would they be willing to release that information? Of course, the whole thing around the Freedom of Information Act, how agencies of government have actually continued to actually, throw that act away. You write for a request, you write an FOI request, they will tell you for so reason they can't release those information. And so it will really be a very difficult task to actually collect the data of how much was spent.
Well, this is a country where until this moment, INEC is unable to give us what APC, PDP spent in 2019 elections. So are you confident that it will be different this time for us to be able to audit these transactions and say this is what happens? And before you answer, I would like to tell you a conversation I had with a politician talking about this mobilization for campaign rallies, and I wondered if it was captured into this cap, and they said it was justified that you pay people to come for rallies because it's like saying thanks for coming, we're paying for your logistics. I never thought that was a thing. I thought that if I support a candidate and I'm going to hear him talk about his manifesto and action plan and what he plans to do for my constituency or state or country, as the case may be, I will find my way to the venue of that rally. But I got to learn about something called thanks for coming for rallies. So I'm asking now, is it captured into the campaign spending, and who can get this kind of data? Because I don't know how many people you can really talk to and in what state, especially for the presidential polls. I mean,
honestly, it's quite a difficult one. Yeah, in the advanced world, people go to listen to politicians to hear their policy direction, to make electoral decision. Unfortunately here, It is not
It's
the
for
case.
bragging rights. It's like
for
it's
bragging rights.
bragging rights. I
able to
guess I
gather-
gathered thousands of people in this.
How you were able to make all of those people come to, to your campaign, nobody wants to know. And these are where the monies are being spent. Unfortunately, to gather those data will be very, very difficult, except we have a transparent system. And one thing, again, I must point out, there is a problem with electoral financing, is the fact that political parties are not the ones funding election in most cases. But the structure is that the political parties are supposed to fund campaigns.
Right.
And so if the political parties are the one funding election, it will be easier for us to trace monies
that was disbursed where, exactly,
to the political parties. And so if we have a system that works, of course, individuals are supposed to sponsor political parties campaign,
right.
Of course, the ceiling is about 50 million or thereabouts for a particular
person, right?
Individual to And so if we have that system that works enough, we'll be able to really trace how much political parties spend, for a particular campaign. But this case, we have individuals who are sponsoring themselves because they have monies. And so you can't really, and you saw what happened, during the cash mopping, policy of the CBN, how some persons were, returning cash, their stock. So you can't really account for those kind of money spent because they are not coming from the bank vault.
Exactly.
Yeah. So these are some of the intricacies in the conversation around how much was spent, how do we really, know how much was spent. But the starting point perhaps should be that INEC should at least request for the spending of political parties. If we are able to get that right, then we can now move from how much political parties spend to how much individuals are spending. Let's even get one right first.
Exactly.
Let's know how much political parties are actually spending. It is easy to actually trace the spending of political parties, except that, again, as a politician, I want to donate to my party. I may not necessarily make the transfer through bank. I could also take cash to them and they will spend it. It can be traced.
It can be traced, exactly. Wow.
So there is a lot of money laundering, around our elections, and it's quite difficult for, civil society and of course interest party to really monitor, to track how much is being spent in our elections. But we are hoping that INEC will do better this time around.
Which time around?
After the election, I'm sure they have about 3 months after election to request for those audited accounts of. Honestly, we are just being hopeful that something will happen this time around.
Okay, before I let you go, I'd like you to give us your final thoughts on how this election went, and for those who are aggrieved at the moment as to what transpired and the conduct of it all, what would be your say? Because we saw somebody who was steering his Nigerian passport, and we've seen several videos like that. People are already disassociating themselves from the country. So what would be your say?
Well, Nigeria is just about 23 or so years in democracy. So we are in nascent democracy. We are very, very young. And one thing we must acknowledge in all sincerity is the fact that we have been able to transit power from one democratically elected president to the other all along, in those 22 years or so. And so it's something we must celebrate. It's something we must celebrate. In some countries, especially our neighbors, we saw what is happening in Burkina Faso and other African countries where,
Victor, I must stop you there because we've really run out of time. But thank you so much for being part of the program.
Thank you.
And thank you for your insight into what transpired during the gubernatorial and state House of Assembly elections. Victor Agi is the PRO Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Joy.
My name is Asonye. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, to give you the conversation around politics and policies and governance. Have a wonderful